we have just a plethora, a gaggle of prop bets that we could choose. So many different directions to go, and I'm going to hone in on one game here. And we could just go all over. We could go willy-nilly here, Jared. We go where you want to go. I'm looking at Georgia hosting South Carolina.
All right.
What catches my eye, Spencer Rattler, South Carolina quarterback. His passing yardage prop is 194.5.
Woo, baby. That's low.
That seems real low until you think, wait a minute, Georgia's got a really nasty defense and a really nasty pass rush. But you look at Spencer Rattler, 353 in the opener against North Carolina. Last game, 345. I can't help but think of last year where they were giant killers against Clemson and Tennessee. So 194, and they should be playing from behind, right? Like, they could be down 3-4 touchdowns as long as Rattler's still in there. He might get some garbage yards at the end. Do we just roll with 195?
Yeah, no, that's a good approach to props too. If you're picking the quarterback of the team that's favored by 28, you're probably not going to get a lot of passes in the second half. Because if they're up by 21 in the fourth quarter, they're going to run the ball. Game script matters a lot. We use the phrase neutral game script when describing how teams perform when they're – because a lot of times we're like, oh, this team's pass happy. Yeah, they're one of the worst teams in the country. They're down by 20 every week. Obviously, they're pass happy. So we use neutral game script to try to analyze how teams – what they choose to do when the game is not completely out of hand. It might get out of hand today with Georgia and South Carolina, and that would help a passing yards prop in garbage time, of course, with Spencer Rattler. I'll give you one today, and we just talked about this game, but I'll give you the Will Rogers passing touchdowns prop over 1.5. I saw some plus money at certain shops. BetMGM's offering this at -110, which is pretty much fair shot right across the board down the middle. But again, we talked about this in the last segment. Mississippi State only threw it 17 times against Arizona. That is not going to fly this week against LSU. And the Tigers have a bit of a deficiency in the secondary. They're outside the top 100 in passing yards allowed per game. Now, I wouldn't bet the passing yards prop for Rodgers in this case because, again, we talked about the ADOT, the average depth of target, 120th out of 126 quarterbacks that have graded enough throws to qualify so far in the FBS. So he's not pushing the ball down the field, but in the red zone, I think that's where the passing game can be a factor for Mississippi State. He's gone over 1.5 touchdowns in both games this season and 10 of his last 15 at -110. I think it's a fair price to bet the Will Rogers passing touchdowns prop today. And the game script, right? They're down by 10 late. They're a double-digit underdog today. We think Mississippi State's going to be passing it, and I think that touchdowns prop for Rogers is the way to bet it.
Here's one that I love. Oh, this is a gross one. Let's go back to Spencer Rattler again, South Carolina quarterback. Rushing yardage against Georgia. At BetMGM, it's set at 4.5. Now, here's the thing.
I know why. Yeah, you explain why.
Yeah, sack yardage counts against the quarterback's individual rushing yardage, which makes no sense.
It doesn't. But that's
to illustrate that, against North Carolina, Spencer Rattler ran for -22 yards because they gave up 9 sacks. So what do you think today against the Dogs? I'm thinking the under.
Absolutely the under. So when I looked at South Carolina's offensive line, they might have the worst offensive line in the entire SEC. They can't run the ball. And Rattler, as I mentioned, has been pressured on almost 40% of his dropbacks. It is a miracle that he has made 0 turnover-worthy plays so far. But that's because he's getting the ball out so fast. That could be the one bugaboo. Perhaps South Carolina looks at this game and says, we have no chance to push the ball down the field. The only chance we have is to dink and dunk. If that's the case, there might not be as many sacks. But you take 1 or 2 bad sacks, that's 20 yards right there. Yeah, that's a lot of ground you've got to make up. So I would not bet I would never bet an over, and I've been burned by the sacks before, Brian. I would never bet an over in a college football quarterback rushing prop because of the sack. It's just too volatile.
Well, I think the matchups matter. In this particular spot, I'd have a hard time taking the over.
Yeah.
Just based on Georgia's pass
under
rush
or nothing.
South
here.
Carolina's O-line. One other, last one from this game, and we'll move to a different one. South Carolina wide receiver Xavier Leggett. He's been a beast these first 2 games, Jared. 178 receiving yards against North Carolina. Last game, 118. Wow. It's set at 42.5 against Georgia, which, again, styles make fights. Like, you have to adjust in terms of the opponent. So, but 42.5, it just seems like it's sitting there on a platter for you. Man, don't be shocked if the under hits on that also. Let's move to a different game. How about this? Let's look at your Penn State Nittany Lions against Illinois. Okay, this caught my eye. Luke Altmaier. He's the Illinois quarterback.
Yeah.
I'm going to test you right here, Jared. His rushing yardage prop bet is at 25.5. Okay, again, Illinois quarterback. Sack yardage counts against his individual rushing numbers. But the first 2 games, he's rushed for 69 yards, 70 yards. Like, he'll tuck it. He'll run. And he's going to have to scramble at times against Penn State. So can he get to, I mean, barring sacks, let's say he gets sacked, 4 or 5 times today, that could be 25 yards right there, right? So if that's the case, he's going to have to rush for 51 yards. He's got to make up that difference. Can he get to 26 yards rushing today? I say he can.
I think he can, but I think the fact that he's had 2 good running games and the line is set so low is telling you that there's probably going to be a few more. Like, the first 2 games for Illinois were against Kansas and Toledo. Yep. The level of rush in his face today is going to be light years ahead of what he saw against Kansas and Toledo. I think Penn State, and listen, we're going to get a chance in a few weeks when they host Michigan to really see what they're made of. But I think they might have the best front 7 in the entire country, at least pound for pound. I know Georgia might have more high-end talent, but I think they do more with less. I mean, what Penn State, I think, has is finally for the first time the high-end guys to match the scheme and the tenacity. They've always been tenacious on defense, but they haven't always had those legit pieces at all levels that they have this year, and the depth behind it like that top program should, Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, etc. I could see Altmaier and the entire Illinois offensive line in for a really rough day here.
Could be. And if they're trailing, that's the other thing. You have to think about the situation. If they're trailing in the second half by double digits, how likely is the quarterback going to tuck it and rush? You know, he's probably going to be trying to throw it a little bit more and get chunk plays. So that matters as well. But, man, you think about a couple of first half, one big run, and you're probably home free. I don't know that he's going to have one, but, right, it's like it's like the underdog in a fight, and you're like, one punch could do it. And it's like, yeah, but is he going to land that
It's a low
one
number.
punch?
It's just those sack props are tough in college.
Oh, it's
like,
the
or not the
worst.
sack props, but the rushing props because of the sacks. I think there's ways to attack those markets in the props, but I think you have to be really granular. You have to really know the team. For example, I don't bet a whole lot of college football props just because I feel like it's a little more volatile in college football with the usage. Yeah. Maybe the quarterbacks I would feel differently about because obviously one guy touches it every play, it's the quarterback. But like the skill positions, it's just there's so many guys on the roster. Unless you have a really good matchup that you really think is a plus matchup, to me, I think it's the tougher of the 2 prop markets. In the bowl season, it gets a little easier because you know guys are going, it's their last game, they're going for a record or whatever. It's a little bit easier, but I think in the early stages of the regular season, be very careful with the prop numbers you look at because some of these guys, you just don't know if they're part of the game plan or not. And the game script, as Brian alluded to, is absolutely crucial.
Huge.